Good afternoon, folks. Hope you're all doing well. Today's video, I just want to give my opinion on what makes a very good threshold player. For the last 2.5 years, all I've done on So Rare is chase thresholds. That's been my number one priority. And although it is far more difficult these days, gone are the days where you could just put five top players where you were almost guaranteed to hit the threshold every game week. I believe if you follow some of these hints, tips, whatever you want to call them, it'll make your objective, which is to hit 250 points, a little bit easier. And the reason I've made a threshold video is because even today, I still believe in terms of ROI, it is the best competition that So Rare do. And whether you're playing super rare, rare, or the limited, the value for money is exceptional. So for the more experienced So Rare player, I do apologise because a lot of these will be obvious. However, the hope is newer users are looking in and they will gain something from this. So number one, which is my first priority, I want players that play, if fit, most games. Although it is still possible to win the threshold with four starting players, obviously, if you've got five, the job is far easier with five players to hit 250 points rather than four. So I would go in depth in the career record of a player that I was looking at. If they're still at the same club as they were from the previous season, I want to ensure if they were fit, they played every game they were available to play. Now, if possible, the types of players that I would look at is club captains, um, the club's best players, because more often than not, those type of players, regardless of what the situation is, they will generally play most games. However, due to budget, etc., you might not aim to go for those sort of players because they will be more expensive, more than likely, especially if it's the club's best player. So work within your budget, but like I said, these are the sort of players I try and target where possible. Secondly, and it's sort of linked to number one, again, I want players who start, but I also want players who remain on the pitch for the most amount of time, preferably the whole match. I don't want to be buying a player and then looking through his history and thinking this guy is being substituted most games on the 60th minute, as they're no use to, in my opinion, a threshold team. Because you can't have world class players in your team now, they've all got to be capped on a certain score. You need them on a pitch for the longest amount of time to enable them to score decent. And obviously, the longer they're on the pitch, the more chance they've got of doing that. So, again, the types of players who are not going to be dragged off generally are club captains, the players or the club's best player, etc., etc. So, again, if budget allows me to, those are the types of players that I would look at first and foremost. Number three, and this again is a personal opinion, I like playing with the two midfielders because, in my opinion, midfielders are more likely to hit a decisive rather than a defender, and midfielders are cheaper than strikers, so hence why I play with two midfielders rather than two strikers. Again, that is not always the case. If I've got a large selection to choose from and I've got two defenders who I believe have got relatively easy games where I believe they could keep a clean sheet, I might put in two defenders. But as a whole, my general rule is to play two midfielders. Number four, because each player can average no more than 48, I like to have some flexibility in the forwards and the midfield position. So I tend to use less average score in the goalkeeper and the defender, which will allow me to, like I said, have a higher ALF 15 rating in the players that I believe have got the most chance of hitting the decisive score. Number five is having choice. Now, I know that might not be Um, Open to everyone, depending on the budget they're playing Sorare on. But in my opinion, it's a big factor in threshold teams. For example, you don't want to have a goalkeeper who's in a crappy side playing the top of the league and they're going to be conceding 5 or 6 goals in that game more often than not. So I would want at least one sub for each position, purely to give you that choice so you can look at the fixtures and pick the player who you believe has the easiest fixture on paper. It's obviously not always going to work, but more often than not, and my example, I own David Marshall who plays for Hibs. I don't particularly want him in my threshold team when they're playing Rangers or Celtic because the likelihood is he's going to let in a shitload of goals. So I want a substitute goalkeeper who I can throw in for that particular game week to cover when David Marshall has got tough fixtures. And that would apply to my outfield players where I believe a certain player has got an easier fixture on paper. I would throw him in, um, and I would just go across all my team and just go through them on a weekly basis, look in. Like I said, just giving my opinion on who I believe has got the easiest fixture and throw him in. Number 6, and this is very important as well, in my opinion. If you've only got a budget to buy 5 players, make sure they're not capped. Their cap score is like 239 or right at the end of the 240 because the first game week you throw them all in, they all have a blinder, and then the following game week you've got no money to put in to show rare, but they're actually over the 240 cap mark. So just give yourself some flexibility if your budget only allows you to buy 5 players. My advice to anyone who've only got a budget to buy 5 players, if possible, try and get a substitute for each position, which will cover for injuries, good form, loss of form, etc. Don't just buy 5 players because it's going to end up in tears, in my opinion. And when I say tears, might not be as dramatic as that, but it's going to mean more often than not, there's going to be some game weeks that you're not going to able to enter the team, and that's not what you want. I forgot what number we're on now. I think it's number 7. But again, me personally, I would prefer my goalie and defenders to be playing for half decent sides because clean sheets are invaluable to those sort of players for their scoring. So I wouldn't recommend you picking a team that's going to end up finishing in the bottom 3 or anything like that, because the likelihood is they're going to concede shitloads of goals throughout the season, and you're not going to see any benefit of clean sheet bonuses. So personally, I would look at play or teams that you believe will finish at least mid-table. Again, midfielders, you don't want a team that's going to concede shitloads of goals every game because the midfielders are going to be impacted with minus scores for every goal they concede. So mid-table, but I would look at players that have got a history of assisting or taking corners where they're going to create chances where they're going to score points from. In terms of strikers, I don't really care. Obviously, the better the club, it's easier going to, you would think it's going to be easier because they're going to score more goals. But providing that striker has got a decent goal scoring history throughout his career, then I wouldn't be so bothered if the club is going to struggle or not, because obviously strikers don't get penalised for the goals that that side concede. And the example I can give you here is when I first came on to Rare Taremi, Mehdi Taremi, who went to Porto. He was at Rio Avenue, who I believe finished fourth from bottom in that division that particular season. Prior to going to Porto, I believe he scored 18 goals in 20 odd games. So even though these players play for shit clubs, if they've got a good history of scoring goals wherever they've been, generally they will carry that on. So, in my opinion, they're the 7 key steps when looking at buying players for threshold teams. Regardless of what scarcity, you're going to be playing threshold teams. the prices of players, I think you're going to get bargains wherever you look at, to be perfectly honest, at this moment in time. And I'm comparing it to prices from obviously 12 months ago when they were a lot higher. I keep boring myself with the same reply. In my opinion, threshold teams by far the best value for money. If someone came up to me now and said, "Look, I'm looking to start so rare, where should I start?" My simple answer would be cap 240, regardless of what scarcity you can afford to do it in. Obviously, these are just my opinions. There's no magic formula. You need some luck at times to get the 250 points. Might be a 90th minute winner, your striker scoring, for example, and get passing or getting you past the 250. It could be a defender making a goal line clearance. There is obviously a lot of luck involved. But like I said, if you can get players on the park consistently and they're staying on the park for the longest time possible, then these things all help in you achieving to try and hit 250 points. So there we have it, guys. That's just my opinion. Whatever you do, please do your own research and ultimately enjoy the game, because that's what we're all here for, and also making money. So I wish you the best of luck in that, and I'll see you very soon.